What's up, folks? Once again, I'm glad to be here to talk about Sencha ExtJS. I'm Joshua. I'm a JavaScript programmer and software developer, and I have been using ExtJS for more than 12 years. This time, we are going to take a little brief tour of essentials and most recurring functionality of the grid panel, and of course, there is a lot to do. So let's get started. I built an ExtJS example application from the Sencha command line, and this is the main screen viewed from a web browser. There are many examples in other videos of how to create an initial application, so we will not spend time on it. Opening the source code in a text environment, the structure is as we can see it now on the screen. We will write the source code of a grid, starting with the class name, sales, grid sales. It is a component that inherits from existing GridPanel class. We will write an alias, also called xtype, that helps us to have a reference in this way be able to relate it with other components. A grid panel has two required and mandatory parts, the definition of a stored and the definition of its columns. The stored represents the source of the data, normally brought from an external remote source that must be invoked immediately the component is displayed on the screen, which is why the autoload action is set to true. The definition of the URL is defined by the proxy object, which is responsible for opening the communication channel so that this external service returns a set of data that is perhaps hosted in a database. Well, at this moment, the server-side technology is not of interest of this video, and this is because it can be anything. ExtJS is adaptable as long as we can respond it in an external service model, normally of a REST type or simple AJAX. Previously, I prepared a JSON structure that contains the records of 5 objects with theoretical information of sales and in a product warehouse. Data such as ID, customer name, place of sale, payment method, date and amount of the sale is information that we can show in our list using the grid panel. Additionally, we add a reader configuration, which corresponds to the object responsible for interpreting the response. That is, on the one hand, the proxy opens the communication channel and retrieves the response in a raw text format. The reader interpreter transforms from plain text to an JSON object. All text is still on format, but is already considered an object at this point. With the root property and the total property configurations, we declare the structure of a response so that is correctly interpreted. Now, let's build the array of our columns. To do this, we need to declare at least the header text of each of the columns, the data index within the store, the source of the data, which must be abstracted to place it in this column, and optionally the width measures in pixels. We will do it at least for the 3 columns that corresponds to the ID of the sale, the date and place from the sale record. It is important to note that this data is a string type. We clearly see it in the interpretation of a date, which is something that later we need to interpret to give a current treatment to the data. But for the moment, it is enough for us. Let's do an extra step. Let's use the xtype name of our component to take it to the reference of the main screen of our project so we can see it on our browser screen. Before testing, I will add an icon and title to the header of what will be our sales grid. In ExtJS, for each of the new files created, it is necessary to return to the command line to rebuild some files that include which classes to download. We do this by invoking the Sencha app refresh command. We just have to wait a little, but should be enough for now have our classes incorporated and be able to use it as we declared in the main file. Well, now let's go to the browser. And here we see the result of the declaration of a basic grid panel. Super simple, without much complications. With ExtJS, it is very easy to create user interfaces because you only need to specify code to configure the visual behavior. The grid panel columns already have default behavior such as resizing the columns, drag it, hide or show them, and of course sort them by selecting a particular column. In this example, sorting is local, but you can also request the service again, indicating that it is remote sorting. A grid panel in ExtJS has an infinite number of configurations that can be added to the definition of the final component, and that provides some additional ability, such as a paging toolbar. In most applications, displaying hundreds of data at the same time is something that can be costly, perhaps not only for the server or database that we use as technology, but for our internet browser. Depending on the device, depending on how you consult it, the resources may be limited, so it is important to limit the display data using a paging toolbar. I will place it in the bottom of the screen. Once again, regarding the columns, there is a special column that serves as a row numerator, so we will include it. And I will also add additional columns at the end. This will be the columns to display the customer name, but assigning the flex setting equal to 1. This means that the width of this column is not subject to a specific size. Compare it is to set width of 100 or 90 pixels. By rather, it means that the grid will span to 100% of the available screen space, and this flex column equal to 1 will stretch as far as the space that the rest of the columns allow. I also added the product number of and price columns, but with 90 pixels of width. To view these changes, let's go back to the browser, and after saving, we will reload to see the new changes. And now here we have them. The screen includes the raw numbering column. The column corresponding to the customer expands to everything possible available. After each column, text is a specific width, and at the bottom, we now can see our paging toolbar. We have not written more than 60 lines of code, and we already have a very complete, very complex list, which using ExtJS is done quickly and easily. Always under JSON notation and defining the configurations that the component and your project requires. But now, let's make some more complex changes that will make building future screen even easier. And this part is what I really love about ExtJS. Its ability to organize your projects in the concept of classes and relating them to inheritance concepts so that we can reuse previously written behaviors in an abstract way and inherit it to the future children so that they can take advantage of those previously written behaviors. We'll define a grid panel base where we will carry part of the code that we have previously written, but that has the quality to be reused for another similar grid panel in the future. Just one question here. What are the qualities or skills that we should deposit in this parent class? My answer is everything that we can predefine. It could be the definition of a store and the columns. We'll provide that value so that the relation between parent and son class it will be faster and easier. ExtJS uses a model of functions that are invoked in the component construction process. The init component method is the ideal place to predefine this behavior. What we will do is to declare both the store and the columns, using methods that are invoked and referenced in the body of the same class. These methods do not yet exist and, in fact, are created completely by us. That is, they don't form part of the ExtJS framework, but we will write them in the same class file. And here it is the first code. We take the body of the object to declare the store. This body structure should be almost the same for all the grids that we make in this project. So it is convenient that we can package it in a base class and only return it as object. Just one small detail. The URL is considered particular and unique to return the sales list, and it will not be shared with any other list. Therefore, here we will have to create a completely new variable also defined by us, which we will call it a store URL. To be able to reference it, just use the reservoir word this, and this definition must be provided by the class that is inheriting this behavior, right here, or somewhere in the body of inherit class. On the other hand, for the columns, the invocation of that method is mandatory, and it is the child class that must be provided. But if it does not, we must at least declare one with an empty body, and we will do this with this object, ExtEmpty function. On the side of the grid sales class, it is required to implement and provide a new body to this method. So we will write them, and return value must be of the right of the columns that must be displayed and that we previously wrote. So the only thing we do is restructure it, and it will be like this. One more point. Almost all the grids within our application will need a paging toolbar. So this block is something that we don't want to be repeating. So we will take it to the definition of the basic class. Perfect. Finally, what remains for us is to return to the command line to be able to incorporate our new base class so that it can be used as part of the project. Sencha app refresh should be the line that should be enough. Once again, we go back to the browser, but we don't see any changes at all. And that's fine. That's because the changes we make are more structural and organization of the code, but doesn't have any visual effect. The visual result is exactly the same. However, tomorrow it will be easier to create a second and third grid if we take advantage of the inheritance and predefining behavior of the parent class. Inheritance structures with the parent and child relationships allow us to create predefined behavior in the parent classes, so that when inheriting we only use configurations to activate them or not. An example of this could be a numerator column. Most of the time we should use it, but sometimes the inheriting class doesn't require it. So for it, we will create this variable enable raw number whose default value is true, indicating that the numerator column is on. The method that builds the columns will be intercepted by another method that we will call build final columns, and it will be in charge of it. First, invoking the creator of original array columns, and his mission will be to condition them using our variable if we want to include them. Then we will add it to the beginning of the array by invoking the onShift method. With this logic and with the default value set to true, we ensure that the enumerator column is included at the column output, unless the enable raw number configuration was set to false, which in this example is not the case. These kind of conditions are unlimited and we can create as many of them as we need. As a second example, we will create another new configuration invented for the purpose to include an action button. Its default value is false. This means that for most child classes, this behavior is not used. But if the enable menu variable is on, then we will include the column. So we add the condition. If the variable is true, then we insert it with a width of 50, and it will have an icon to press. Since its value is false by default in the parent class, to be able to use it in our sales grid, it is necessary to turn it on by enable the menu to true. This indicates to the parent manufacturing that be a column that should be included in the screen output. Trying now in the browser, when reloading the screen, we can see that the raw numerator column is still there. But on the other side, we can now see the action column so that we can activate it in each of the records. For the moment, it has no behavior when pressed and only shows this tooltip when hovering over the mouse. Let's now move to another level of configurations. It is time to talk about the data processing, and we will achieve this by including the models. The purpose of defining a model is to standardize the type of data and its core interpretation. We receive from the remote source, from a service, the data is interpreted directly as a string using a reader. But this data must perform operations in our programming, add, subtract, compare appropriately. And that's the purpose of the model. Specify how we should convert to the correct data type. Let's start with the ID field, whose value is not a string. It is an integer. The next case is the field date. Dates are very important to convert to their date format, because right now it is an unformatted string. And if we continue in this way, operations or printouts cannot be performed with the format. So we must write its correct type and interpretation structure with this date format configuration. We continue with the sales price, which is floating. We can also interpret other properties, such as a credit has a boolean and a status has an integer again. This model, being a new file, we must incorporate it to the project by executing the Sencha app refresh command. In this way, it cannot be invoked by other classes. And that's exactly what we will do. But we will do it in an abstract way on the base class. In the store definition, we will relate a model that will be a variable store model, which in the parent class will have a default value xDataModel. Any classes that inherits this behavior will be its base model. However, it can be overridden. For our sales grid, it will be our app view sales model and sales model. With this model now defined, we will add one more column to show the status of the sales records with the data index status. Good. Now, the columns need to show not only the current data type, but they must go through visual interpretation processing. That is to say, in this case of the date field, it is not enough to convert the variable from string to date. Now we must convert the data to the correct printout on the screen. Therefore, we define the column as a date column, and the format that should be displayed is with month, day, and year, and its time. Something similar happens with the sales amount column, which must show a number with the appropriate sign. To do this, we use the renderer configuration with the format useMoney method to process it in this format. Sometimes the format is a little more complex, and for this, we need to write our own function that processes the data and returns a text corresponding to the value. This renderer function receives three attributes: the value received from the data index, a pointer to the table cell, and the record that brings the information of the entire row. The objective is to create a code that, according to the integer value of the status, makes an interpretation in text. We can write that right here. But no, we won't do it here. My recommendation is to bring this type of logic, since it is highly reusable, to the definition of a model. So in the body of the model, we will write a new method called renderStatus. And the coding is as following: a variable to define the output format, span, class, a new span with the icon and the text. This code represents variables that will be interpreted at the end of the function according to the status number. This is for each of the status within a switch case structure. If this is equal to 0, we will return the addition value with a warning text and pencil icon. In case it is paid, the text must be a success, the icon a check, and this represents the status 1. Finally, for the default case, case 2, we can use it to show cancelled records. This is using the red text and the times circle icon. This is our block of our status function, and of course it may have a greater complexity, but for now it's enough for our demonstration. Returning to our grid, in the render declaration, we will directly invoke the renderStatus method, and it will do the processing for the integer value. Let's now go back to the browser to reload the changes, and once again, here we have the results. We can see that the data is now displaying correctly. In the case of the date field, the service reading went from string to date, and from date to a suitable printing format. With the amount column, we see that the quantities are now shown with the $sign appropriately, and the complex case was for the status column, which is not only text, but also includes an icon according to the status. We don't have colors in this moment in this status. It will be convenient to write our custom styles and include them in the project for better visualizations. We will do it in a moment. Let's now implement the appropriate action for this menu icon. For each record, sometimes it is necessary to have operations such as sending by email, printing to PDF, cancelling, duplicating. What we will do is show an action menu when clicking on the icon. So let's go back to our source code. Since it is behavior that can be reused separately on our screens, we will build this functionality into the grid base, the grid panel that will later become the parent of all our releases in our application. The execution context of this button is with the same class. That's why we write scope this. And then we will declare the function that will be executed when clicking a little further down in this same code. OnClickRecord is a method that receives several parameters. First of them is the grid itself, the row number, the column number, an informative parameter to the invocation of the method, another with the information of the browser event, and it's also included the corresponding record that triggered the event. The first thing we will do is to stop the browser event by invoking the stopEvent method. We declare a variable that must represent the right of the options that must be displayed in the menu, made by the buildMenuOptions method. This method can declare some generic buttons such as a print or send by email, but normally it is very particular, so it must be implemented by the class that inherits this behavior. So we declared an empty function. If this method was declared and its returns value is positive, then, when clicking, we will select the row that was clicked and also will save a reference to the record that was retrieved in this event. And we will show the corresponding menu. In case that it has not yet been manufactured, we will create a new instance of a floating menu with the ExtMenu class, passing in the array of options that we declared in the child class. Finally, we will show the menu in the position where it was clicked, recovering the X and Y position of the event. On the other hand, in the method declaration in the gridCells class, this function will return an array of buttons that we set. They will be displayed in the floating menu. We declare 3 buttons to start: the button to print to PDF, the button to send it by email, and a button to clone the record. Additionally, a button to cancel or delete them, to which we put a red icon to be able to carry out this deletion. We will write a button handler to will make a reference to the grid store to remove it. We pass as a parameter the selected record, of which we saved a reference when the action button was clicked. After remove it from the list, all that remains is to hide the menu so as not see it on the screen. Let's go back to the browser to test these new abilities that we gave to our sales grid. What we now do is click on the action button and we see that the menu can now be displayed correctly. If we click on any other section of the body, since it is a floating menu, it will be immediately hidden. We are going to click again on the menu to try to delete one of the rows. We are going to select the delete option. And that's it. It works properly. Now we have 4 records left, now 3, and now only 2. It seems to work very correctly. The ExtJS GridPanel has an unlimited number of configurations, properties, methods, events, and behaviors that can provide us with a wide variety of combinations to create the screens that our applications need. In the list of examples of Sencha components, the Sencha Kitchen Sink, we can find demonstration of these combinations, and in a particular case of the grid panel, we can see how we can change colors and text, icons, give column formats, grouping rows, selection models by rows, by cells, with a selection box, expanding rows, the painting toolbar that we already incorporated in our project example, and many more. I think it may be valuable to add some additional options to our example. Let's take this ability to group rows and copy the corresponding configuration from this grouped grid example to be able to achieve this. Features. It is an array, because surely there can be several options that you can apply to our grid. So I selected and pasted into our sales grid. Right here, it's fine. Just, we will make a little change. I'm interested not only in grouping rows, but also I will add a summary to be shown with the sum of the rows by columns, such as amount, maybe. Therefore, the grouper will be the group summary. In order to create this grouping, it is necessary to specify the name of the grouper field in the store definition through the group field configuration, but it will be referred to a variable that will be declared in the base class. We will call it the store grouper. and define it with an empty default value. The inheriting class can override it, and in our example, the field that we'll consider as a grouper, it will be place alias. Let's now go to the definition of the columns. Taking advantage of the grouping, I will place the count operation with the summary type property and with a renderer function. We configure the output text to be an spam tag with some predefined CSS classes to change the color, perhaps using BG dark and bold text. We will return the round count. Also, we will take this same definition of two properties to the sales amount column, but here the operator is sum, and we change the renderer method to return the text in a dollar format. It seems to me that with this we have done all the basic configurations. I only removed this configuration to start in a collapsed mode from the definition, and what we should do now is go back to the browser and try it again. We reload and we have all behaviors ready. We can see that the columns are grouped based on the place of sales field, 2 for California and 3 for Texas. At the bottom of the ID column, we can see that we have our sum of grouped rows. In this also case, 2 and 3. And in the price column, the sum of each records, 84 for California and 396 for Texas. Everything else like the menu works the same way. Let's go back to the Sencha kitchen sink and see the example for editing cells. This is achieved with a special plugin for the grid panel. We copy this fragment and take it to our code. Just as we did with grouping, once this object is defined in the definition of our grid, what remains is to include the editor in each of the cells that we require. For example, in the case of date, the corresponding editor will be a date field. And we can declare configurations that this component requires, such as the format, the minimum value, the days of the week disabled, etc. This is just an example. We will add another editor in the customers columns that will be a list, temporarily a local list. But to do this combo, we could also define a remote configurations to bring the list of customers through a data service that retrieves them from a remote database. For now, local will be enough. One more editor. We define it for the price column. Since it is a number, it is best that it be a numerical text editor. It would also be a mandatory field with the minimum and maximum value. Let's go back to the browser to see the result of the changes. The cell editor is shown until the user clicks on the cell. In this case, the calendar. As we see, Saturday and Sunday are disabled as configured in the component. And with this we can select a new date for registration. Just a small detail to comment on. The date must include a time, and the calendar only establishes the date. Perhaps there is an opportunity here to create a new component that defines the date and time. In the customer column, when you click on the cell, our list of available customers will be shown. Here we don't have any details and everything works correctly. We can see it as many times as necessary. As for the price, by clicking, we can edit this cell, and if we change the value, we can see that the sum of the column is also modified. This happens every time we do it. The total price added will make a new count. Okay folks, to conclude with this example of a sales grid, we will add some colors by defining styles in a Cascade sheet. So we will create a grid sales file to adapt the styles used in this component. The declarations that we must define are those that we use in the renderers or of columns. For example, the case of a text grid, we call it text mute, and we will do it in the same way for text danger, warning, and also success, which is a green color. Also previously, I wrote two more classes for the summary columns. It would be the BG dark, which will have a dark color but with a light text, and the BG class to place in the summation boxes of the columns totals. We can modify the colors, sizes, and positions of the components always using CSS. Another example could be for our grouper grid, change the font for the grouping header. We could do this if from the browser inspector, we look for the correct DOM node. Here we seek to first identify who we should modify. And we can see the styles and rules that affect the color of the text. Now it is enough to prove that we can change it on a blue tone, and yes, it is the correct way. We could also apply the same color to the border color of the header. To do this, we look for the correct class, which is in this case is ExtJS group header, and modify the border color. Not only that, we can also affect the thickness of the line border. With this, we must include this instruction in our TEM file. And it's very important to compile the project once again, but this time we will do it with the Sencha app build development command. Unlike the refresh command, the build development command will also rebuild the style sheets that are incorporated in our application. Once it's finished, we return to the browser and everything was done correctly. We have the style changes applied permanently. Changes the color of the text in the header and the header border color. Also changing the status text. Here we can see that we have paid ones, the addition and the cancelled ones. And the color for the total groupers, the number of the rows and the amount of the cells amount. The rest of the functionalities are working correctly. To finish, I would like to show some screens of a system built with ExtJS and where we can demonstrate that the list of information shown with the grid panels are very frequent. The combination of rows, columns, font size, colors, and icons can create components for different purposes, including menus. The row grouping behavior, it is very efficient to differentiate information that makes users have a simpler experience when using our applications built with Sencha. That's all, folks. Thank you very much for reaching this point and developing with Sencha ExtJS. I hope this example has been demonstrative for you, and see you in the next one.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching this Joshua talk, and also thanks for you, Joshua, for this amazing contribution. My name is Emerson Januaro. I'm a developer advocate at Sencha. And it's a pleasure again, Joshua, to meet you here again with your good contribution. Speak. Thanks a lot. Now we are going to open one question and answer session. Are you ready, Joshua? We have some good questions for you.
Excellent. Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so if you'd like to say something before the question, you are here. Thank you.
Okay, now let's get started.
Okay, so I have one question here that can a grid panel be used without a model?
Well, I would say that it's necessary to remember the objective of a model. So it is necessary to define the correct data types so in each field. So in each of the records objects that are stored in the store. So it's important to recognize the type of data to perform operations, to perform comparisons, or maybe validations. If we retrieve a record and we want to condition them, it is better to compare integers with integers, floats with floats, dates with dates, and not between integers with string integers or string dates with data or date objects, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, for sure, you can do it. You can use a grid panel without a model, but it's not the optimal and it's not the appropriate. So defining a model is highly recommended. It is not mandatory, but almost you for sure don't need, as long as the data you manipulate is very simple. But If the data becomes more complex, such as maybe invoices, clients, customers, products, it is always highly recommended to use undefined models, because in this way you can be more optimal and efficient to operate and render the information in the grid panel appropriately. So I will add also another case. There is another advantage to use a model when you use a model, because the model can synchronize data. So if you don't use models, you can synchronize the entire data using the store, but this is done in a group all together. So in the other hand, when you define a model and you can define the proxy in this model, you can allow each of the records to be able to auto-save their own information. So to reading and writing all to services, and this is because you are using a model. So it's not recommendable, or it is to say it is highly recommended to use a model, but for sure it is not mandatory. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks. We have another question here. What is the difference between columns and also view config in configuring a grid panel?
Columns and view config. Yes. Columns and view config. Well, the columns are an array of objects that individually define the visual effect of the visual mode, and this array configure each of the column in the grid panel. So we are talking about the width, maybe the header text, the data index, and maybe how these data are rendered in each cells in the columns. So this controls how all the information is displayed. And maybe you can manipulate also the style sheets that are applied in each column and cells. Also remember that cell editor and the editor field is configured through a column object. In the other hand, the view config, it is a single object that configure a behavior in a global way to the grid panel, and configure some properties in this high level that affect the entire grid panel, such as the style or the rows, actually. So right now, I also remember that there is a configuration in the view config that enable or disable the possibility that the user can maybe select the text in the cell, and this is do it through the view config. So that's the view config. That's the difference.
Yes. So the difference is, so view config is more related to cells and row views, right? Configuration.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Another question here about difference. What is the difference between a check column and also a checkbox model?
Yeah, difference. A check column and checkbox model. Yes, I would say that the main difference is the effect of the select row. So the selection model, the check selection model, in this case, the important action that occurs is when you click the selection box, or even the entire row, you can select, or you can change the selection between rows. But in the other hand, the check column, it works alone and does not select the row. But also this check column can change the value of the field that is being set in the data index. So it is important. This is the difference. And there is another difference. You can use only one checkbox model because the controls the entire selection model in the grid. But with the check column, you can use many hash units. So this is maybe this is according to your data. Yes.
Good. I have another question here. For example, let's say that we are using one remote server and sometimes we don't know the columns we have. So is it possible to create columns dynamically in GridPanel?
Yes, it is. It is possible to create dynamically these objects. For surely, yes. And we can do it in many ways or according to different times. For example, you can use an AJAX request before rendering the grid panel, before rendering the component, and retrieve from a service, remote service, the data that maybe controls what are the columns. So in this way, you can provide them to the component before rendering to the creation process and manufacture the final columns according to that response. Also, there is another way to do it. And this is maybe when the grid panel is already rendered. Or perhaps you can constantly change the columns, the value columns or the columns that are rendered in the component. So the grid panel has a method that can do that. It is the method, the reconfigure method. And this method receives two parameters because you can change the store dynamically. Actually, this is the first parameter, or make a new array of columns. And also, we use this method to change it, right? So in order to change dynamically, you can do it maybe in these two ways.
Got it. One another question here. What is the most appropriate way to manage large sets of data from a service and be able to display them in a grid panel?
Okay, this is a very interesting question. I will say that I always think in a paging toolbar. And I will say that paging, for me, maybe it is the optimal way to manage this large set of data. I think it works most of the modern in the modern platforms. But there is an important issue that can maybe highlight, and this is how and this is depends on what we are doing. So maybe we can define some strategies to show this large data. So, for example, the simple one is the paging toolbar. No? Using a paging toolbar, we know that the data are divided into a little pieces, little windows of pages of a fixed size of the entire data, and allows users to navigate between pages. It is useful when you don't need the entire data. You can load it through these pages. And however, maybe we can talk about other strategies to do it. Other way can be maybe the infinity scroll, and the load on demand strategy. And in one hand, the infinity scroll, you need to consider the buffer render property in the grid panel, because this technique allows to load the data when the user scrolls down the grid panel. So the data is loaded dynamically as the user scroll, and it is free from memory when it is not longer visible, all this data. And in the other hand, the load on demand, in this case, you can put, or you can use a load more button at the end of the data or at the end of the screen. this way is useful because the user only need to see a small portion of the data, and it is loaded dynamically when the user needs to indicate that need the next page, and it is do it through this button. So you can implement any of these techniques and any of this strategy, but always depends on factors such as maybe the amount of data, the database capacity, the user experience for sure, and maybe some requirements of your applications, the design of the screens. Sometimes it is important to consider the devices that users use to enter to your application. So most of the time, I always use Painting Toolbar, and I have never had a problem with that. Yes.
Got it. Good. We have another question here about cell editing plugin. The question is, how can I implement cell editing in a grid panel, but limit the editing to only certain columns?
The cell editing. Okay. There are many scenarios here. I would say, and we need to also remember that the editor configuration in each of the columns, only those columns that have defined this editor can use or can edit this plugin. However, like I said, there are some scenarios that may appear. I could mention two of them. One of them is that sometimes editing, it depends. The possibility of editing depends on some factors. For example, if the user has the privileges or the role to do it, right? This is a very important case. What I will do is before to render the component, we also need Ajax request to retrieve an array of permissions and pass them to the component. So in this way, maybe we can validate to add or not the cell, the editor in the cell, in the column, in the definition. And another example, it could be that there is a variable or a value in the same record that condition the permission to edit. That is, for example, if the status of the record is editable, so yes, you can. But if it is not, if it is maybe closed, the status is closed, it cannot be edited. This can be solved when you are listening and even call it before edit. So in this handler, you can receive the record and you can evaluate this value to do it or not. This handler can return the value false. If false is returned in this even method, it will cancel the edit cell. So it is not longer possible to edit this cell. So maybe there are many other scenarios, but for the moment, I think of this.
Good. We have more 10 minutes for questions. I have another question here, not kind of question, but one request from a member here. And also invite you to create more content like this. So they would like to have a future webinar covering the use of the 3-grid panel, especially regarding use the schema. The server response be nested as a JSON in order to use 3 grids. The question is, can I configure relationships between models into a nested structure within ExtJS? So
if we can
have one question here and one request to create a new webinar in the future abording and related to 3-grid using schema and nested JSON. You got it, the question?
Yeah. Well, maybe there are 2 questions right here, right?
Yeah.
For in the future, maybe we can. I would like to make a new webinar talking about the tick grid. The tick grid is a very important and also very complex component in the framework, right? Actually, it is important because no other frameworks can implement this solution component in the way that ExtJS do it. So yes, it is very complex, and for sure, maybe in the future we can do it on next webinar talking about this. So then the second question is if we can relate the models, right? Or
Yes.
how was it?
Yes. Can I configure relationship models into a nested structure within ExtJS?
Yes, for sure. I think you can do it because models are prepared to cap these relations. And I think it is not related to actually to the grid panel. This is related with the data. You need to configure and you need to define these relations, but in the store or in the model. The model actually is prepared to have many relations between one-on-one, one-to-many. So maybe you need first to configure these relations, and it is completely apart to the grid panel. It's not related. Yeah.
Got it. I have one question here about one modern JavaScript technique here. Does ExtJS support async and await JavaScript keywords?
Yes, I would say yes. But I will say also that I'm not user of these keywords because these keywords maybe are this came from the modern age of the modern, and ExtJS is a very mature framework that came from 2007, and the technique of writing the code is like in a traditional way. So I'm talking about the traditional right way and the modern way. So yes. In most of the examples in ExtJS, these keywords are not included because ExtJS is writable in most cases like a traditional keywords and not in these modern ones. But just for sure, you can do it.
Yes, I remember that in our documentation at Sencha command, I guess we need to specify our JavaScript version in our app.json, so you can use ECMAScript version, new version. So I guess we can explore this and also use these new keywords. We just need to set some configuration in our app.json, and I guess Sencha command will do the translation of the new keywords.
Yeah.
Just a complement to your. Okay, I have one last question here about the infinite scrolling. You were saying, is buffered store better choice in using infinite scrolling? You said that you are comfortable using paging toolbar, right? But now we have one question about buffered store. Is it better choice in using infinite scrolling?
Well, I would say that there is no better or worse. There is
it depends, right?
Yeah, it depends. Yes, right. It depends. It depends according what are the user experience that you are implementing, right? The type of applications that I have been working, the paging toolbar is more adaptable to the user experience that I offer to my users. But infinite scroll for sure, it has another way to navigate through this data. So maybe in the device, in some devices, maybe in smartphones or modern devices, infinite scroll could be a good way to do it. But the infinite scroll has the limit that you cannot navigate to the end of the data easily as the paging toolbar can do, right? Because the paging toolbar, you can navigate to the beginning from the end, but compared with the infinite scroll, you cannot do it. So it depends because the goal is to show the data, but also, here we are talking about more than what are the user experience that you are offering.
All right. I guess we answered all the questions here, Joshua. So I'd like to thank you again to making this good contribution again using the ExtJS. Love it.
I'm very glad. I'm very glad
We
to be here,
explain
Emerson.
everything. So thank you very much. We do not have
No,
any.
thank you to you. Thank you to you. Thank you to the team.
Okay. So guys, so thanks for joining our today's webinar. The webinar recording will be available in our Sencha YouTube channel very soon, and we are going to send you a link by email soon. So stay tuned. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.